All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. We have an action-packed advisory council meeting today. So let me just briefly go over the agenda. We can do roll call, and uh, then we can get right into our content today. So actually, we have a lot of information. If we can actually do roll call in the chat. So if you are an advisory council member, if you can just put your name and affiliation in the chat, we can do that so that we can get right in to the content. Okay, so today's agenda, we'll do roll call. We'll have an EPR framework discussion. We'll give an update on the needs assessment. And then as always, we will end with public comment. Um, and without further ado, I will actually turn it over to Michael real quick, and then we can get into the material.
Thanks, Bradley, and very happy New Year to all of you. I think we have an exciting agenda, as Bradley just mentioned. I just wanted to say that I want to just comment on the last council meeting that we had. It was one of the best that I've ever seen, and I really appreciate everyone's collegial cooperation and the way we engaged. It really showed a lot of call it class and dedication. And the thing that I admired most was the way people built on each other's ideas, and we were able to get things accomplished. I think it was very good. The second point is, I think you all heard Senator Augustine. He actually commented on that, but there was something he said that I want to just remind all of us, which is that with the new legislation session starting, that they will move ahead to do something on this EPR. So it behooves us as a group, as a leadership group, to really make sure that we give them something to include in that legislation, which is why today's strategic framework discussions, I think, will be very exciting. And I anticipate that we will have essentially the same type of engagement, building on one another's ideas that really differentiated our last session. I really appreciate everyone. So with that, let me say thank you again and welcome to this new year. Exciting so far. And I hope you all are taking good care of yourselves with the wind and snow and driving safely. So thank you very much, Bradley. I'm going to turn it back to you.
All right. So yeah, I agree. We had a very productive meeting last time. There was a lot of information to get into. And then so let's get right into the EPR framework discussion. So we actually had two submittals from board members, actually two submittals from three board members. The first one was from the Trash Free Maryland and the Sierra Club. And then the next one was from and I always get them mixed up, the NDDEDC Beverage Association, from Ellen. So I just wanted to quickly turn it over to those individuals to kind of discuss their thinking about what they submitted, how this could be implemented into legislation, just so that it's come from your words and I'm not missing anything or anything like that. And then we can start to go through those line by line. Is this something that we want in our program? Is this something that we don't want in our program? Is this information that is better for the plan? Is this information that is better for legislation? So that's going to be some of the discussion that we are going to be having today. So I'll first turn it over to the Sierra Club and Trash Free Maryland to talk about what they some of the stuff that they submitted and their thinking around that. Is either Martha or Kelly on the line?
think we're both here.
Yeah.
Kelly, do you want to start?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much, Bradley. I think this is a comment that we had made earlier this fall before we got into some of the details on the needs assessment. But just a reminder that a lot of the details that we are discussing and that we discussed in our most recent meeting are things that, will come out of the plan and be informed by the needs assessment. But before we can decide, I think we've struggled a little bit to decide on some of these finer points down in the weeds because we need to agree first on the overarching goals and framework for what we're trying to do. And so just identifying, and I did see some commonality in the things that people submitted. Are we trying to just modernize the recycling system, or are we trying to minimize environmental and human health impacts of packaging? And if our goal is to minimize environmental and human health impacts of packaging, it conserve resources and begin to build a circular economy where we keep materials at their highest and best use for as long as possible. That kind of broad overall objective language with associated outcomes will help inform some of the other decisions we need to make. And also inform, that could be present in the legislation, but then leave some of the details for how to get there to the experts in particular, packaging materials, for example, because this body doesn't represent the experts in all the types of packaging, but we can talk about what the impacts are that we want from this kind of legislation. And the previous bill was a great start. But we started this paper, as you can see, the legislative intent that was in SB222, but we can learn and be informed by the process that's happened in the last couple of years in other states that have moved along on their processes. And as we discussed, I think in November, there's a lot of benefit and more opportunity to leverage and maximize our outcomes if we harmonize with other states, recognizing we have a different state. We have our own needs, but also harmonizing where it's appropriate with shared outcomes will help the producers and ultimately help us align for the greater environmental impact from what we're trying to do. I don't know, Martha, if you want to add to that. Actually, one more thing I'll say is we had put in here conserve resources, but I think a more recent version of this, we added in moving towards under program goals, moving towards circularity by establishing a circular economy framework to maintain materials at their highest and best use for as long as possible. Because that's something that we might do differently today than we do in 5 years when there are different technologies and packaging products to deal with. But we don't want to go back to the legislation every time a new material comes out. So a living framework. Go ahead, Martha.
Yeah. We were thinking that we need an overarching framework that will, if this is really about a longstanding program, that we need to look at the long-term objectives, and the objectives of SB222 are embedded in the ones that we're proposing. I mean, that is all there, but we're not here just to reduce waste and improve the recycling system and compensate local governments. That's part of the solution, but it's not everything that we wanted to include. That's what a framework's about, looking at your overarching goals. So I just wanted to mention that we worked on this right after Peter Blair's presentation of all the different approaches in the other states, and looking across them to see what looked good, what looked best for our needs. And that's really all. And the definitions are also based on the things that look good from the other programs and seemed appropriate to Maryland's needs. In addition to that, we have some definitions are also part of a framework, not just the goals. And we thought there's some very important definitions we should be able to settle on, irrespective of what happens to the recycling needs assessment. Also, there's some metrics there. Metrics meaning, indicators that one might want to track And then other issues we thought we could settle on would be that MDE would set in targets in the rulemaking. That we need this definition of recycling and recyclability. We'd like to see, and this is in other programs, I can't remember now which ones they were, the requirement in statute that at some point in the future, all packaging must be recyclable, compostable, or reusable. Also, language from the Minnesota bill that if there's a separate bottle bill and EPR for packaging program, that they have to be coordinated between the two. So that's where we came out as a starting point.
All right. Yeah, well, thank you for that submittal. Ellen, I will turn it over to you if you're on the line to talk a little bit about what you sent in, and then we can start to get into the details of this information.
Sure. I appreciate the submittals, and I do see some alignment. I agree. The one disalignment I don't see is changing the legislative intent. The Maryland General Assembly submitted a bill to us. We don't legislate, and we do not have the authority to change the intent of that law that passed and the tasks that are put before us as an advisory council. And so I just think that's really important for us to look at. I understand there are other policies that some of the groups would like to move forward. And I think, that's what democracy is about. Those policies have to be brought before the Maryland General Assembly or some type of, new law that expands the intent, authority, or commentary from this body. So I'm just looking at what was passed and, a recommended, conversation for framework. One important note I do want to mention is that all the states that have moved forward pre-finalization, needs assessment. They've been able to organize as a structure and at least begin the process. I remember 3 years ago, first of all, I lose track of time. So 4 years ago, 3 years ago, maybe yesterday, the General Assembly, all of us, I think, at the table talked about the runway needed to finalization, right? The runway needed to further the policy. And I do think that was what I want to talk about today. So, just a framework, the benefits of EPR, I think, should be in the framework. This is what, I'm just speaking to the framework they asked us to go forward with. So you see that the circulability, environmental health conditions, and markets, I think the scope of the material, we should make a recommendation and or make a recommendation, operational considerations, the scope of covered entities, the governance, which is first base, and we ought to spend time on that, the governance and the appropriate oversight. Again, I'm just going to stress here, the EPR Advisory Council is not the pro. We're not legislators, and we're an important entity that does have influence over MDE and pro decisions, but we are not the pro. I just think, or should not be the pro. I do think that's important. I think monitoring enforcement is key, data collection, the fee structure, education and communication to all end users. And then the principles for analysis and refinement will drive the program goals and producer fees that should be based on eco-modernization. So from a framework perspective, and Martha, I agree. I understand other interests on this call have other legislation pending. Absolutely, if leaders of the General Assembly move forward with the deposit law, just like in, I think, 2 other states, that mandate can be, the pro can be tasked with untwining or packaging from our packaging from the pro. I just say that. I don't think that's in the legislation, but I just wanted to say that openly, Martha, because I know that's an important impediment potentially to, as you see your future goals. So that's where we are, I guess, in closing. I do think we ought to, pose questions also to the pro on the call. But, this is a very lean framework that does not need to be fully developed. And I just want to say that we can establish the structure of a pro, the oversight, the authority, different authority points. We can look at the scope of the material and the data collection. And a lot of this can be done through, number one, regulation or additional legislation that may follow year 3 or year 2. So I hope that's good. I will try to answer questions. But again, the thing I want to point out really important is we cannot expand legislative intent. I just am looking at the task ahead and our responsibility back to make some form of recommendation. Thank you, Bradley.
Yeah, so it looks like we have some hands. So I'm gonna first go, I think, Chris, you were first.
Yeah. Hey, good morning, Brad. I'll be brief. So not to hijack the time here, but I think before Maryland mandates all packaging is recyclable, we need to see how California deals with the implementation of their law. We need to keep a close eye on that. So just that comment for the group. Okay. Thank you.
And then Scott.
Thanks. I just don't necessarily understand what Ellen's trying to speak to when she talks about the expansion of the scope. And I disagree with her assessment that bottled deposit is not a form of EPR or shouldn't be. Some sort of off-ramp should not be included in there if there is such a bottle deposit. We've presented information that actually shows that the two programs working together are more efficient and have higher results and lower costs for the entire program.
Right.
I sent that material around, but it hasn't been circulated to the broader group. And EPR, bottle deposit, is a form of producer responsibility in the manner that it can be created. So I don't, if you're trying to speak to that by talking about not expanding the scope, I think you should just, let's just, be direct about what you do and don't want. But I don't understand what you mean.
I agree to, no, maybe I was misheard. I agree to an off-ramp should deposits pass the Maryland General Assembly. I just wanted to point that out. As far as the legislative intent go, if you go back to Martha's presentation, they're looking an alternative formula of legislative intent, formation of legislative intent. That's not what we were tasked with. We were tasked with the legislative intent in Senate Bill 222. So that's all. Absolutely, Scott. Off ramp is totally fine. Not just on bottles. Maybe that should be expanded. Off ramps on other packaging that the General Assembly provides mandate should be, part of that conversation. So totally aligned with that. But the legislative intent was clear. It wasn't to, begin to do some of the things that are outlined here.
So more about the environmental impacts than that they were presenting.
And the establishment of goals. Those are things that are generally left, Scott, I think, to the pro for approval by MD and then EPR. So, we can agree to disagree. I think the law was, clear task to us, and we have to stick to, I think, what the job is. And if the General Assembly wants to come back and say, hey, we want you guys to 360 pro responsibilities. We want you guys to 360 new environmental mandates and responsibilities. Then I think that's where we go from here.
Okay, I just wanted to. I couldn't tell exactly what you were
Sure.
You were
I hope
trying
that
to
clarifies on that.
clarify.
I totally on the deposit off ramp language. I just throw that out there because I don't want that to be the impediment to consensus.
Oh,
Yeah.
there's more than just that as an impediment to consensus. But you know, I'm happy to present again on what I think the benefits are of a deposit return system within a system that is going to be created. We have data that shows that we can actually do it more effectively and for less money for all producers if we include one when we start this. So, but I think I understand you on some of the other intents. We may agree or not agree on what those intents should be, but I understand what you mean now. Thank you.
Yeah, and just as a comment, this is so we can always vote on some of these items as an advisory council. If there is legislation this year, then there will be opportunities to update that legislation outside of this advisory council. So the advisory council may decide not to recommend to change legislative intent, but the legislative intent may change as a result of the negotiation with the legislation being developed. So just to put that out there. So I'm going to move over to Peter, and then we'll get to oh, Martha, you were next. Sorry.
Yeah, I just want to go back to what our mandate is here in what passed in SB222. And that's on page 31 of the big markup. The Advisory Council shall evaluate and make recommendations, including legislative recommendations, on how to effectively establish and implement a producer responsibility program in the state for packaging materials. And I read that to be a broad view, not necessarily adhering to what's already been there, to look at the objectives. So I disagree with Ellen on that point. And I invite all of you to read that. It is not nearly as narrow as it was previously.
Yeah, and I brought up the text just so that everyone can see that. Okay, Peter.
Thanks, Bradley. I just wanted to say I thought both of the emails were quite helpful, at least to me. I think you know, in the sense of, you know, I look at this and say, how are we as an advisory board going to get to those recommendations as quickly as possible so that the legislators have faith within this group? So the list that's provided through Ellen, and I guess if we're including legislative intent as well, how do we pick our way through each of those pieces to say, what is our recommendation in each of these areas? And I'm worried we're trying to boil the ocean all at once in each of our meetings rather than taking piece by piece and saying, look, this is what we believe the scope of materials that should be covered is. This is what we believe the scope of producers that should be included, what exemptions there should be, and provide those recommendations in a clear pathway so that the legislators understand here is what we are going to be delivering on. And I guess I'm just wondering, is there a way we can get to a list and schedule our meetings to make sure that we are showing continuous improvement or path towards getting the legislature what they've asked for? And
Peter, we later on, I actually have a presentation which will kind of walk through those items. We actually already have a definition of packaging materials and producer and exemptions associated with each one of those. So just as a starting framework, I have that also in the presentation, and then we can decide to recommend. We can vote to recommend to either keep it as is, add or delete, or do something else. Kelly, I think you were next. Oh, Kelly, it looks like you are muted.
Thank you. Sorry about that. This was responding to an earlier point, but I was just trying to clarify that it's not so much expanding the legislative intent, but looking at the original legislative intent, which is to come up with, the recommendations for a producer responsibility program. And it had things in there on improving, including improving reuse, recycling, and improving markets. And so what we were just trying to articulate with what we submitted was, how would we measure that outcome? Does improving, I think we will come up with different things. If improving means more recycling of more packaging produced in the state versus if improving recycling means better packaging, less overall packaging, less impact overall to the environment, more resources conserved, like getting at that circularity, which wasn't articulated in the initial legislation, but it was, the initial legislation did include a requirement for analysis of options for increasing recycling and waste reduction and reducing environmental damage. I mean, that's all in the original legislation as part of what should be included in the recommendations. So I don't think we're expanding the legislative intent so much as I think it will guide all of our work to agree on what menu of options we want to provide to legislators for outcome measurement and goals.
Yeah. Brad, I think just to chime in here, I think this is exactly what we asked for, this type of input in a collegial manner. And one of the things I would say is that it looks like we have some common ground, even from the two proposals and comments. This concept of circularity is clear. Everybody agrees. And this idea of having end market things that, when we talk about sustainability, it's not just about saving the planet. It is about saving the planet and saving the bottom line at the same time. So you do that in tandem, we have a great EPR. So I think I see some common things. Maybe one of the ways to approach this is maybe take some of them and address them one after another. Things like the governance and oversight. Maybe we can start there so that we can have some points. I also want to say that, yes, I see all the SB22 framework. For most of you, you've read it as well. Not to put any pressure on us because we're already doing well. It says we need to submit something by the end of 2024. What I'm saying is, I think we're in a good place now that we're seeing the direction of flight, meaning that we have to come up with a recommendation that will go into whatever legislation that the legislators take on. That's really a very important thing. So, Brad, maybe we should go into addressing this one after another and see where we agree. But I really appreciate what everybody is doing here. It's really what we should be doing. And thanks.
Yeah. So I have a presentation. I've kind of combined both of the submittals into this presentation. And I'm not going to keep it in presentation mode just in case if we have some edits and or if we want to document some votes on these slides as well. So very similar to our voting that we did, I think that was 2 meetings ago. We'll use the raising your hands function in the actual Google Meet. If you don't know where that is, if you see where the big red phone is, or what phones used to look like, 2 buttons over, there's a big hand, and that's how you raise your hand using Google Meet. So so right here, this was the submittal that was submitted by Ellen right here. I did add legislative intent as a potential item to update in the framework. And we can take a vote on whether we want to update or whether we want to consider and or change what was submitted by the Sierra Club in Trash Free Maryland. So just based on Michael's recommendations, going to start with governance and oversight. So the roles and responsibilities of each one of these entities. So if we are going to look at the pro, what are some, like, what is the pro's role in this? Is the pro the one that's collecting fees, redistributing money? Is the pro the one that's setting goals, or is that going to be the state, or is that going to be in legislation? So that's going to be kind of the discussion that we want to have for this. So, so what I'm going to do is as people are talking, I'm going to try and type as fast as I can, and then we'll go through these individually, and then I can add, delete, or do or revise as we are talking. So, throwing it out there, what is the what should be the role of the pro?
I don't have my hand up. There's quiet in the background there, but you know, I'd like to hear from Peter, but I think the role of the pro should be, you know, the collector of the registration of packaging. They should be responsible for developing the plan with the producers and establishing the fees to meet needs assessment goals. I do think that they should be the goal setter with MDE approval and EPR advisory council. This has been, I believe, the model that exists in other jurisdictions. So I do think they are the ones that handle those key tasks. And, you know, bring forward or bring forward recommendations for review from the EPR Advisory Council in a very transparent, public way. I don't know, Peter, if you have other comments. I'm not trying to put you on the spot. I'm just trying to focus on the role of the pro.
Peter, we need to make sure that we give you opportunity to express that. That's why this is a collective expertise. So to Ellen's point, why don't we hear from you on how you would define it before we get any ideas?
Yeah, I mean, typically what the legislation does is it sets the flag post upon which the pro needs to satisfy these. It usually satisfies those requirements first by producing a program plan that is approved by the state and requires consultation with producers, usually the advisory board and other stakeholders. The pro will register all producers, and usually you want that registration to happen early in the process. The pro will then set fees as Ellen has mentioned, and that requires as well assurance that there is feedback that is provided, consultation that's provided around how those fees are established. And then there's usually reporting requirements on that pro and the need for the plan to be updated, usually on a 5-year term.
That's very helpful, Peter. One thing that I would say you probably missed, but I know it's in your mind, is the idea of a pro having being the one expected to make new recommendations, new technologies, innovation. That's part of the pro's work, right?
Yeah, the pro will establish how it's going to invest potentially within the state, and that could obviously, Michael, include in new technologies.
Excellent.
So in the original Senate Bill 222, the Pro also held the account as well. I know that's something that we've talked about as well, and it's not an account that's actually held by the state. Although the state costs for review, compliance, and enforcement are reimbursed by the Pro. Do we just want to clarify that the account is held by the Pro?
Correct. The Pro raises the funds through producer fees and finances it. There can be limitations on the Pro around the reserves that they may collect. That's typically put in place in the legislation as well.
Scott?
Yeah, thanks. A couple of things that the Pro, I agree with everything that Peter was laying out there and what's being developed. There's a couple other things. Performance measures of service providers is often assessed by the Pro, and some of the ways in which producers meet the goals, right? So recycled content, things of that nature. It's different for each material. You know, there needs to be an emphasis on some more than others once you see the needs assessment and see the baseline of where everything is. So usually the Pro is setting those functions as well.
So setting the methodologies and reviewing whether producers are meeting their goals, or
producers and service providers to the program. I mean, if you want paid on as a, you know, it's, if you don't, I'll go back to a point that I've made in the past. EPR for packaging shouldn't just be shifting the costs from the taxpayer to the private sector. It should also be improving the overall system. And so you need some entity, and usually it's the PRO, assessing the actual service providers who are going to be part of the system. Is there a bar for performance that needs to be met as a baseline as to what should be done, the system that's used, that kind of thing.
And just to
it's not just a handout.
Yeah, just to tack on to that, I think that's a very important point, because if you invest in the system without improving the infrastructure, then you're essentially subsidizing a market that is struggling to compete with virgin materials already. So what I think Scott is suggesting is, like, let's try and make recycling more competitive so that it is the choice outright.
And quality matters
over virgin materials.
As I think you heard from all the material groups on the day that the material group spoke, quality matters a lot in the final disposition of where the material is going to end up.
Scott, that's really a very good point. And Peter, I think we can try to capture that as well. You recommend on the bring forward recommendations on how to improve the thing. Maybe give some examples, including when there are new technology platforms that would allow us to be more efficient, and sorting all kinds of things, and maybe put a few things there to make sure we capture Scott's point properly. This get towards circularity and competitiveness is what I'm thinking about here. Scott, I don't want to put words into your mind. Is that what you're really thinking?
Yeah, those are all positive points.
Excellent.
Yes.
Thanks.
But are those essentially reporting and tracking, Scott? I mean, because it's tracking performance through the system, right? How much is getting collected? How is it getting managed? How much are ending up in end markets?
Yeah. And for everyone else, sorry about this. Peter and I served together on a different state thing. There are in the needs assessment, you're going to find that some facilities need more help than other facilities in order to perform the objectives. Of course, the private sector entities that are here are making their own investments so that they are able to be, better service providers in the system and win some of the contracts, right? So there's the contracts for hauling service and things of that nature. But remember, there's also a deficiency in processing of some of the materials, sorting and things of that nature in all parts of the state. It's not all equal. And so what we've discussed in some other states is that is the pro responsible for getting the low areas up, you know, or is there some sort of mutual responsibility of the people that want to be service providers in that area? Say the Eastern Shores, you know, I don't even want to say, let's reverse this. Let's say the Eastern Shore is much higher, you know, performance rate, efficiency rates, things of that nature than, you know, somewhere between Baltimore and Montgomery County, and that certain counties need, or certain facilities need extra help. Is that all the pros' responsibility to fund, the producer's responsibility to fund? Are there activities and investments that need to be made by the service providers to get them up to a minimum standard of performance? But also, Peter, to what you're saying, the tracking and reporting has to be there. If somebody's not meeting the goals, if the system components aren't helping to meet the goals, then it's not always on the producers to pay those fees, extra fees, to compensate for that.
Chris?
Hey, Brad, thanks. Just real quick again, you know, we certainly want to drive increase recycling, but, you know, firmly, I just wanted to state this. The pro cannot set performance standards for individual service providers. I want to firmly get that point across. Thank you.
Why do you?
Why should they? Why should they set the performance standards for, you know, the pro doing that? I mean, doesn't make sense to do so, and I don't think that's fair to the system.
Should the state do it?
I mean, I think that's up for discussion.
Okay.
That's up for discussion.
Or do you think there should not be performance standards?
I don't think there should be performance standards at all, but if anybody's going to do it, it's the state, not the pro.
What have some of the other states done in terms of those performance standards? And maybe, I think, Eric, did you have your hand up first? And then Peter? Oh, you're on mute.
Thanks, all. And I appreciate the discussion. I just want to chime in about some feedback from the stakeholder engagement that could help inform this. Maryland is unique in that they have Maryland Environmental Service as well as Northeast Maryland Waste Disposal Authority. Both Maryland Environmental Service as the quasi-governmental and Northeast Maryland as an agency that is either actively involved in supporting the counties, municipalities, and constituents. Maryland Environmental Service is a service provider, and I think that should be considered as one of the more unique aspects of this state in comparison to some other programs.
Yeah. Peter?
Sorry, I just had a more question to Chris. I guess I wasn't quite sure what he meant by performance standards. But essentially, usually these programs are about not necessarily paying to ensure that the status quo exists. The whole point is to improve.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me just say this, Peter. Let me just clarify. I don't think the pros should set the standards by themselves. I'll just say it that way. It should be more collaborative. That's all. Okay.
Yeah, possibly with the approval of the regulator.
That's fine. Yeah, it just needs to be collaborative, not independently. Thank you.
And then which goes to this point right here, that
Gotcha.
Alan was making. We could say set goal / performance standards.
Yep.
And I'm sorry, and that's what I was trying to add. I was not just the end result goal, but the goals within to get there.
The lead metrics.
The how do we get there, not just the what the destination.
We're on the same page.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. This is looking good. Okay. All right. Anything that we want to add to this? Do we want to vote on this or kind of set up the roles and responsibilities for the other entities? I'm going to move on to the other entities.
Yeah.
But Peter?
I was just going to suggest, maybe like people may need some time to think this through, Bradley. So I wonder if
I think that,
maybe
yeah,
what we do, and then if we're going to vote on it, maybe do it in the next meeting or something like that. I don't know.
I think that's a good suggestion. Uh, as we heard from the senator in our last meeting, I think we're likely to have legislation this session. So the timing is not ideal. So we can't do too much waiting is more what I'm trying to get at.
And Bradley, if that's the case, I mean, certainly I'm more willing to meet more regularly with this group if that's what's needed. I just want to make sure that we're thoughtful.
Yeah, no, I hear you on that. Okay, all right, I'll move on. So the role of the state agency, so that's MDE in this case, what's our role going to be? Peter?
Well, you're the compliance arm, right? So you are making sure that producers are meeting their requirements under the act, i.e. to register and to participate, pay fees into the program, that the pro is meeting their objectives. So your role is largely a compliance role, oversight and enforcement of the legislation, and probably a role to coordinate the advisory board.
Just the dovetail from the previous slide right here, approval of the plan and goals.
Yep.
Right regulations is another one. Anything else that we would be doing?
I think Martha's got her hand up.
Oh, yeah, Martha?
Yeah, evaluation.
Does that fall under the compliance arm right here?
It's evaluating the effectiveness of what's going on, whether they're reaching their objectives or not.
Oh, okay, so more like,
Whether we need, do you need a tweak because it's not working?
do we need to adjust? Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
I would also say that in writing the regulations, there's a certain amount of rulemaking that can also encompass more specific objectives or targets. A lot of the other programs, as I recall from Peter's talk, actually have a role for the state agency to set some of the targets. Especially when they're not in the statute, but not limited to that.
Yeah, so and that's a good point as well. Just with the regulation process, there is a public participation process with that as well. So there's opportunities for the public to comment, the agency to respond to each one of those comments, and then make adjustments as necessary to the proposed regulations. All right. All right.
Brad, let me ask, is it clear, when you talk about expand on targets, isn't that part of making sure approval of planned goals and targets? I mean, I think we can combine such things because it really gives the state the overall power on that.
Can you say that again? I think you're talking about this one right here, right? Oh, you are muted.
Sorry, my friend. Sorry. When you talk about approval, I think is a very important thing. I think the expanding targets, all that, we should put it under maybe approval of plan, goals, and, targets expansion or something like that, because this is really a very important thing for the state to make sure that the targets are really, addressed at the same time. If you need to talk about the effectiveness, that's a different thing, but I think we should put that there.
Okay. All right.
And setting some targets too, not just expanding them, but I mean, the statute may not have much in the way of targets.
You're right.
There are programs where the rulemaking is where the discussion goes on about what the target should be. So.
All right. I think and this is a point of clarification for Ellen, in your submittal, you had a fourth bullet for monitoring and enforcement. Is that really what we're talking about right here? And can I delete that one?
Correct.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure about that. All right. Okay, the advisory council. So I'm gonna put this down here. Advisory, not the pro. So what's the role of the advisory council in this whole schema?
Maybe
Peter?
I'll start, Brad. I mean, typically the role of the advisory board is to review. So that would include, the program plan, annual reports, changes that might be made to the program plan, and to advise. And so, that advice is usually delivered to the government and to the pro as they move forward.
So give advice. Sorry, I just want to. I might have to ask you to repeat a little bit.
Yeah, sorry. Review. So the program plan, specifically the annual reports, and then the role is to advise both the government and the advisory board, or sorry, the pro.
Now, I've seen in some regulations that the advisory council has the ability to comment on the plans and reports, and then the pro, as they are finalizing the documents for submittal, they talk about how they addressed each one of those comments from the advisory board. Is that something that we just want to make sure, because for transparency, that there was this comment, this is why it may or may not be incorporated into the final product? Okay. I'm just trying to think of how I would write that. I'll just say review and comment on program plan and reports. Pro would document how
I think essentially you need to move that then under the pro. The pro needs to respond to the advice provided by the.
I think that's a good. As I was typing, I think that's good. Yeah, pro responds to.
You could say pro responds to advisory board recommendations.
Okay. All right. Okay. All right. I know I'm missing some comments in here. If you are on the advisory council, you can raise your hand and get in the queue. Scott?
Thanks, Bradley. Peter got it laid out mostly there. I think it's important from the state perspective and in the legislation, you're going to want to kind of formally say the advisory board is an advisory board to the department or to the state. It has a role in the development of the initial program plan that reviews all of the needs assessment things, the things that we're doing now. But then once the program plan gets going, then the advisory group role, might morph just a little bit and starts to be more of a, it is both in virtually every state. The interesting thing is, just as every state EPR so far is different, the specific role of the advisory board and the construct and how and exactly what its duties are slightly different as well. But I think the right way is what has been laid out.
Okay.
The advice is to the state, essentially, to the department, but also to the pro. And there's a consultative process in the development of the initial plan. But then once the things get going, some of those initial duties, the advisory board responsibilities morph a little bit over time.
Okay. I'll put on vote on, I should say, vote and give recommendations. I'm going to go back to here. The MDE also staffed the advisory council. I get to coordinate. This is more specific though. Okay. All right. All right. Is there anything else at the advisory council, Martha?
I was just going to say that we had a long discussion during the development of SB222 that the PRO should not be a voting member of the advisory council because it's a conflict of interest. It can be consulted, but not a voting member. And the other thing that comes to mind is the issues here and the way we've been performing as an advisory council. It's still not clear to me whether everything is a straight vote or whether there's an opportunity for views of different constituencies on the advisory council to be reported.
So
as opposed to like a single voice.
Right. The pro is currently on the advisory council. So as of now, they are a voting member. I guess I'm going to open that up. Is that something that we would like to recommend to change?
I mean,
Peter?
To comment on their own proposal, on their own plan?
Martha's completely right. It would be inappropriate for the pro to comment on its own plan. Like, I mean, it could be there as a resource, and that's how that works in other states. But we shouldn't be voting on whether we agree with our own program plan.
I know on other boards, other or councils or working groups, other folks have abstained from voting, or do you want to make it clear that the pro cannot comment on their own plan?
I think we should make it clear, Bradley, because that conflict of interest, we need to avoid that. So just be clear on this one. I think Scott made a comment earlier about the advisory council morphing. That's part of it. So let's be clear on that going forward. Thanks.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. All right. So are there any others, Scott?
Sorry, one more thing. You may want to consider some term limits or things like that for members of the advisory board, circling through, rotating, that kind of thing.
Do other states
just like any other state?
Okay.
just like any other state, I'm sure Maryland has some other, statutes or something that govern, volunteer advisory boards in other entities. This can't be the first volunteer advisory board, but
I think Scott's on the line, and I think he has a little bit more experience with this. Another Scott, Scott Goldman. Scott, do you know off the top of your head if there's term limits for board, councils, working groups? If he's still on, I don't know if he is. I don't know if he's at his computer.
Bradley,
Shannon?
what's the question, Bradley?
So the question is for advisory councils, boards, working groups, are there rules about term limits? And maybe Stephanie, too.
Well, for some there are. I mean, for example, some of the statutorily created commissions, for example, like the Lead Commission, there are term limits on commissioners, and certain boards, there are term limits. I don't recall whether this legislation established any. I don't seem to recall any.
I don't remember. I don't remember anything around that.
Yeah, but there probably should be term limits just so you can keep fresh perspectives going and all of that.
Completely agree, Stephanie. I think term limits for any advisory board, any advisory council is a sine qua non, it's a requirement. I don't think you should have people there in perpetuity, So that's definitely something to include. I think Ellen has her hands up at it.
Yeah. Ellen?
Yeah, the only thing I want to first, totally, not opposed to any term limit thing. I do think we want to keep a level of expertise, though, from an industry perspective. So it's just, I don't want to create a nuance here. I just think that the advisory council has, different segments of an industry that need to be represented. So I do just want to throw that out. Thank you.
Yeah, and just another item, I think we do have some, a couple council members that have maybe only come to like one meeting. So I guess another part of this is there a process to bring on more engaged council members? Because I know we had to tell a lot of people no, because we were limited to 21 people. So that's something that I've been, and my staff have been mulling around as well, because we want to get as much engagement as possible, especially since we had to tell people that our council filled up. Scott?
I was just going to say, I see all the appointments to any of the commissions, councils, work groups that MDE sort of supports or staffs like this. And yeah, there's a wide variety. There is usually a term. There are usually terms, specific terms. They don't all have term limits, and they often all have like specific, to your point, Ellen, like an expertise requirement. Certain positions are tied to certain industries or certain stakeholders, and so yeah, certainly a participation attendance requirement. Most of these councils, I think, people who are experts are often reappointed. So it's a variety of, there's really any option that the council can take, but that's structured for most of them, that is structured in the legislation that created it. Or I guess the council can create its own policies that don't contradict that legislation.
So Scott, if that's a responsibility of the MDE or the government, we should add that. We shouldn't let it just float. We should add it to the responsibility of the MDEs. Is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think it's so, and there's almost 100 of these, by the way, types of entities that MDE touches, right, in some way. Some are, and in a range, a wide spectrum of independence. This one's actually probably one of the most. versus, it's specific to MDE. But in all of them, yeah, ultimately, MDE personnel and in many cases, the secretary are reviewing the appointments, the applications, determining ultimately who gets appointed, with the exception of external appointments. There are obviously a lot of members appointed by the legislature, by the governor, to many things. I could go on, and I don't think it would be useful, but really, if we're thinking hard about the structure and future of this council, there's really a wide opportunity to set it up as you all think would be most productive.
Yeah, but adding it to the to that point, adding it to the responsibility of the state is very important, because I don't think we should police ourselves, so to say. I think the government should be the one that is.
Yes.
I think it needs to be a clear responsibility, in my opinion. There shouldn't be ambiguity there.
I think that makes sense. Vetting is, I think Bradley just wrote that. Vetting is, that's a good way to put it. That's a basic duty of the state for all of these organizations.
Yeah, and just for this one, we received a lot of letters on recommendations for this council, and we vetted those, and we made sure that we were filling each of the seats. So, and then we presented those to the secretary to make a decision. And we also prioritized, if we were sent a letter, those folks, because we wanted to make sure that we had engaged stakeholders in this. So, all right. Okay. And I know the governor appoints some members, some other bodies may appoint members, or our secretary appoints members. I think the secretary of MDE chooses all the members for this one. All right. Any other items for governance and oversight for the advisory council? Okay. I'm going to move on to legislative intent. So this was the legislative intent in Senate Bill 222 right here. Oh, Kelly, is this with legislative intent or back to roles and responsibilities?
No, back to roles and responsibilities. Sorry. But just on a quick thing, I don't have the specific answer, but maybe something about like a requirement for how, like something that will like push action, right? Like a requirement to meet at least so many times a year or something like that, because that both helps communicate to potential members what the responsibility is that they're signing up for. And also can be an impetus for action, right? Like must make a report every year on recommendations for the program or something like that. So I just put that out there for consideration.
Okay, so I know I just saw some legislation this session, I forget which bill it was, that it was also setting up a council that said that they would meet at least quarterly and draft a report each year. Okay. Requirements to meet. And then must submit a report each year with recommendations. Okay. All right. Cool. I'm going to move on to legislative intent. So this was the legislative intent in Senate Bill 222. So going back to Martha, was this language struck from the final bill, or was the first legislative intent that was introduced with the bill? I can't remember.
This was in the This was in the final, let's see, I just took down that. Can you scroll back to search for the word intent?
Yeah, hold on. I just had it up too and I closed it.
Yes.
And I
Pretty sure it's what was there. But our mandate is to consider a program, and I would assert that you know, we have not removed that intent. We've just clarified that, you know, that the intent is broader than just one element. Recycling, where is it? Oh,
I'm
there's a
not
whole,
seeing the word
there's a whole
intent in there.
definition section here. Hold on. I think intent comes right after. Here it is. It's on page 7. Let's see. No, wait a minute. It's not. I can't locate it, but I'm pretty sure I copied it from what was passed.
Okay.
Kelly,
right.
do you remember?
Maybe as we're talking, maybe someone on my staff can take a look. I'll also post Senate Bill 222 and in the link so folks can take a look. That was the enrolled bill. Even so, in a version of Senate Bill 222, this was the legislative intent. The question is are we good with this language, or do we want to expand on that?
So Bradley, one comment I would add is,
I'm sorry, it was dropped. So I just found where it was cut. It's on pages 14 to and bottom of page 14, top of page 15 on the bill that was adopted. It was actually dropped. That was the penultimate version that was up there. This was actually dropped. It's the intent of the General Assembly, improving waste and recycling systems and all of that.
So we don't have intent right now, or at least explicit intent.
Right.
So maybe this is something that we want to have a broader conversation on. Yeah. I will actually. There's a few hands up, Peter.
Yeah, I was just going to note. So my only concern, I think, with the language that's being provided by Martha and Kelly is just simply that some of the aspects will add significant additional burden. So specifically when we talk about reducing the toxicity of packaging, I'm not sure exactly what that means in reporting, but that could be significant additional reporting requirements that producers would need to provide to the pro in order for the pro to establish whether a package has toxicity associated with it or not. So that's substantially quite a large undertaking that the pro would have to do, and producers would probably then need to break out all of their packaging by the actual product that they've got. So it is a big undertaking. The other one I'll just mention is certainly I understand the intent of improving the labeling of packaging. The pro can certainly, I guess, potentially provide some incentives around the labeling of packaging, but we can't force anyone to do anything. And I guess I'm just wondering whether it is the appropriate place to deal with labeling.
So Bradley, there are several hands up, but I would ask is, would it make sense? This legislative intent seems bigger than what we can address now. Maybe something we will spend time later to address, so we can get to some of the points where we have agreement. Because I'm not sure that that's really critical for the work we need to do, but eventually we can address it. So So maybe people should think about that so that we can, there's ambiguity here of whether it is there or it is not there. So I just think it might detract us from the momentum we have now.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. So this might be an opportunity where we want to vote. Do we want to provide a recommendation for legislative intent, or do we want to move on? So if folks can put down their hands just temporarily, we can do a vote right now. So do we want to recommend legislative intent? If you can raise your hands for yes, and this is only for council members.
Can
And
I
then, oh, go ahead.
I just wanted to just a quick comment on the whole voting thing, Bradley. I think, first of all, I think this is very, very productive. And I do think we're getting to a place where we can meet the goals. Do we need to really start taking voting? Can we get through this and then have consensus, right direction, wrong direction, or you can get these together, send them out by the end of the day, and people can contact you? I'm not opposed to voting at any time. I'm just trying to think of keeping the consensus that we have going here, as opposed to yays and nays. Just something to think about.
And I'm also confused about what we're voting for. Like, are we voting about discussing the legislative intent as drafted by Martha? Are we discussing whether we should be any discussion on legislative intent? I'm a bit confused about the purpose.
Right. So for the first one, it would be, do we want to even give a recommendation on legislative intent, or leave it up to the legislators? And if we do, then dive into that, because the original legislative intent was struck from Senate Bill 222. And Martha, I know this was your item, if you want. But we do have a lot that we need to get through as well.
Yeah, exactly. Brad, let me also say, if you read from the legislative document, the purpose of the advisory council is to provide advice and make recommendations regarding establishing and implementing a producer responsibility program in the state for packaging materials. So I would say, let's maybe put this for later and go ahead and look at the things that we can at least agree on.
All right. So we do, I'm going to let Martha respond, and then if we can move on.
I think there were a couple of people before me who had their hands up, but maybe they already, I don't know if there's somebody before me. I don't know how you can discuss the structure for a program when you don't have an agreement on the intent. And I'd also like to point out that these aren't things that Kelly and Martha dreamed up. This was from consultation with, just review of all these other programs. I mean, a lot of these are actually in some of the other EPR for packaging bills that have passed and are being, are about to be implemented. So it's very difficult. And I just wanted to say on the voting thing, that has concerned us. It's not really clear how decisions and recommendations are to be made in an advisory council. If it's a straight vote, there are many representatives of the industry here. I mean, should there be allowance for a majority and a minority consensus? Or, I mean, how does one go about making recommendations if it's a straight vote?
Yeah, so how I've seen this
it's
done,
confusing. I don't have an answer for you. I don't know how they work elsewhere.
How I've seen this in other working groups or council be done is there's some proposed language. The council talks about editing that language, adding, deleting, whatever. And then if there's a general consensus, then there's a majority vote on that. So that's how I've seen it done in Maryland before. And so yeah. So we would be doing something very similar.
I wish it could be somewhere in writing here about the decision making and on the advisory council in the bill, or either through rulemaking, because it's like if you have a strong minority view, you never have an opportunity to express it because of just the selection of who's on the advisory council could always be overruled. And that goes, equally for environmentalists and for producers too. I mean, for everybody, how to reflect the advice of the advisory council.
Right. And so some of the other working groups, councils that I've been a part of, like there have been conflicting opinions, and there's a discussion on how to adjust the language so that there is general consensus, and then that is voted on. And I've seen successful votes even when there are has been some conflicting opinions as well. So Chad, I think, or was it Delphine that was next? Delphine?
Sure.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Delphine.
No, just quickly, just two things. First of all, I agree with Martha that it's difficult to discuss a law without knowing what the intent is. So I think if this should be part of a discussion, it's kind of hard to continue the discussion without having that. And I will just suggest two overall comments on the intent. What Martha is proposing is interesting, but would come at an incredible cost and complexity for many of us. And so as such, I think when you consider the cost benefit, I'm not sure this is worth it. But if you go to the original proposal, the fact that the intent is to improve recycling systems instead of recycling rates, I think is a major concern. Because you can improve recycling system as much as you want. If the rate is not increasing, you are not reaching your overall objective. So I think that's that would be my main concern with the intent as it is right now. The main objective, if there are two objectives and we need to simplify them to a maximum so that everyone can agree, at least we should consider recycling rates instead of recycling systems.
Yeah. And okay, understood. So I'll let Chaz go. So what I'm thinking for this is we're at our next meeting, we'll probably get a little bit more into the, actually what are the recommendations going to be. So I'll leave this here as is, and then we can talk a little bit more about it at the next meeting. And then we can move on, but I'll go to Chaz first.
Yes, just one comment. The more complicated we make the bill, both in intention and otherwise, the harder we will to have a successful program. And I think we can see it now in the status of some of the ongoing state implementations. The more problems you try to solve, the less likely we are to solve any of them. I think we need to be highly focused in what we think are the most important problems and solve those in this bill.
Yeah. Good advice. All right. I'm going to move on to benefits and impact. So it seems like we have some general consensus that the bill should focus on circularity. We also talked a lot about end markets, that we actually need to have end markets where this material can go to. Otherwise, you're just optimizing the collection and creating a bigger pile of recyclables, potentially recyclable materials. And then we also have environmental and health concerns. Is there anything else that we want to add to this list right here? Chad? You're on mute.
I'd like to raise one flag. Well, I realize that circularity is the theme du jour. It's ill-defined. I don't think very many people really know what circularity truly means or how it works out. And secondly, Circularity, if it, for instance, means that we want all the packaging to go back into packaging, will not increase in markets. It will not increase recycling rates. It just simply shifts things around from one use to another. And I'm not sure that's a productive outcome. As a recycler, I'm more interested in markets for recyclables. Frankly, I'm less interested in circularity. And I think we also need to take into account life cycle impacts.
I do know some other models of circularity. There's priorities. So going back into materials or cradle to cradle into other products. So that's I know others have looked at circularity in that aspect as well. Scott? You're muted, Scott.
Sorry, I had turned on my camera, but not my. I understand circularity is somewhat ill-defined, but I think we could probably get agreement that we want to avoid having recyclable material go to landfill. And I think generally, if you're going to require the packaging to have higher content, recycled content, you need to work to return more better quality material back into the supply chain so that the packaging companies have the ability to increase the recycled content. So it goes hand in hand. You can't just put a demand on the packaging to have recycled content if you're not going to work to return that material back to the stream. Every material has a variety of downcycled alternatives, that left to its own, if the quality is not there, the material cannot be returned to its highest, best use.
But that implies we know what a highest and best use is.
Well, I mean,
and frankly, Scott, I think it's better that if you have competing markets, then you're going to end up with healthier recycling because you're going to be getting more value. If you limit markets, you're going to put a damper on competitive desires to buy that material, and you're going to end up lowering the value received and the income the program earns.
That's not what we're saying, by the way, because if you don't, investments are expensive. So if you don't have an incentive to invest and to apply best practices to get the best recycle output you can, people don't do it. So I mean, I totally agree with Scott, especially if there's a KPI about recycled content. Then you need to make sure that the input can become recycled content. Because I'll tell you, when it comes to a can, if it's not an UBC, it's not recycled as a UBC, it's gonna end up as like on a bridge or a building,
So,
not as a can.
So the consistency that we're seeing within the states, all of them have PCR goals or are planning on having PCR goals. So there is some, so that can help bring a material back into those materials. But that doesn't necessarily mean that other markets don't exist as well. So I think we could do both at the same time.
Yeah, you have to ensure that PCR goals allow for competitive markets for those materials and don't simply insist the materials can go to only one end market.
Right. And
that just lowers your revenue stream.
I don't think I've seen any state laws that limit markets. There's typically incentives for more circular packaging. Packaging producers are paying the fees, yet the material, if not treated properly or incentivized to get back into packaging materials, is going to go to non-packaging end markets. That is, just asking packaging producers or brands that use packaging to incentivize the raw material for non-packaging end markets. So there needs to be some sort of recognition of an incentive for circularity. I'm not suggesting that you limit it, but you need to, I mean, otherwise you're just asking the food and beverage brands or the non-food and beverage brands, the other, you know, any brand that is using packaging to incentivize the raw material for somebody else.
But Scott, if packaging producers use that as an excuse, then why bother with competitive markets for materials? Why not just give them at a discount to the packaging members?
Chad,
Right.
It's
we could
markets that
spend a
make
whole hour
recycling work,
talking
Scott.
about, we could
Scott,
spend
it's
a whole
markets
hour
that
talking
make
about
recycling
this.
work.
Yep. So I think we have to move on. I haven't
Please.
seen the restriction of markets. PCR goals can help bring material back into packaging, but that doesn't limit that. If someone's going to pay more for that material, that doesn't limit the material going to another market as well. So,
PCR actually helps the competitiveness of this recycling system. So it doesn't detract from what everybody's saying. So let's add that and move on, and then we can, but please don't restrict the markets. That's the point. I mean, but PCR is a critical aspect of improving the overall recycling program.
all right. We only have a half hour left, and we have a lot more to get to. So if it's all right with folks, if you want to put your comment in the chat, I'm going to move on to the next item.
Well, life cycle, you just added life cycle. I mean, I'm sorry, not everybody's necessarily going to agree on that. And is it the life cycle of just the packaging, or is it the life cycle of the entire system management? I mean, let's life cycle trucks. Let's life cycle, you know, competitive subscription services. Let's life cycle, if we're going to life cycle the whole thing.
I agree with life cycle. Like it's a nice thing, but there's so many competing methodologies and input and everything. That's it's a tough one. Huh?
Right, and from when Oregon presented on their when we had them talk to this group, I believe they're one of the states that does have life cycle, but they have close to a 60-70% recycling rate. So they're really trying to optimize their system. We're in the high 30s right now for our recycling rate. Just as a point of reference, Colorado is around 15 for their recycling rate. So we're kind of in the middle. So some of the states that are further along with their recycling goals are definitely looking to optimize with some of their.
Minnesota included it. Minnesota included it as part of their eco-modulation discussion, but you know, I mean, you just need to be more specific about where and how.
Okay. All right. I'm going to move on. If there's other items, folks can put those in the chat as well. All right. Okay. So scope of the materials covered. I did want to put that one of the few things that did get through Senate Bill 222 and then rolled bill, not in the third reader. There is currently a definition for packaging, and I just generally paraphrased this right here. So primary, secondary, tertiary packaging intended for the consumer market. Servicing packaging, so it includes carry-out bags, bulk goods bags, takeout and home delivery food servicing packaging. Beverage containers as well. It doesn't specify the recyclable material for beverage containers. It just says beverage containers. And then there's 4 exemptions. So containers for pesticides, there's 2 different medical types of packaging, and then the liquefied petroleum gas containers that are designed to be refilled. So these would be like propane tanks, stuff like that. So this is currently in law. So if we're going to be making recommendations, it would have to either add, delete, modify these items right here. Peter, I think you were first.
So just a couple of things. Some of these are coming up in other jurisdictions. So just ensuring that we understand what the consumer market is. Is that just to residences? Is that to businesses as well? Who is considered the actual consumer? So sort of making sure that that's absolutely clear. I would say we are having some questions around reuse and refill. Are those products captured in the legislation or not? They are a bit more difficult potentially to define, and because there's that line potentially between a refillable product potentially, or a package, and a durable product, like a coffee cup I buy from a store, a travel mug. So there's a question on that side. And I would say just on the exclusions, I think at their face, the exclusions are what you have written down. But I think as we look at some of those definitions in other jurisdictions, the pesticide packaging refers to federal legislation usually. That legislation does include lots of different products, everything from, you know, items that you clean your desk with, wipes and stuff like that. So is the intent to capture and exclude all of those materials. When we talk about FDA exclusions, that does potentially include, that exemption potentially includes some products that maybe you don't want to exclude. So you start to get into potentially healthcare products that may have you know, like dandruff prevention types of materials in them. So it means one shampoo bottle may be covered and one may be exempt. So just making sure that the group is comfortable with those exemptions. And the last one, just on liquefied petroleum gas, it's just a question to me as to what's the intent. Are we trying to exclude hazardous materials? Are we trying to exclude refillable? What is the intent of exemptions? Like, what are we actually trying from a legislative perspective? That's helpful for the pro to understand as it tries to implement these laws, because there's lots of nuances as we get into these categories.
Yeah. So as you were talking, it is pesticide packaging regulated by, this is FIFRA, the EPA Act. That regulates pesticides. For the drug medical device, this item, it's just as federally regulated. And then, so some of these are definitely paraphrased, but I didn't want to have a whole slide of just a lot of.
No, and Bradley, I just more mention it because, again, this does create challenges as the pro looks to enforce, and obviously some of these materials are clearly going to make their way back into the system. So other producers will pay for those materials that are going to be recycled into the system. So,
and we're going to have a whole stakeholder process with the regulation writing. So maybe we can get into some of those details in regulation as well. And it doesn't necessarily have to be in the legislation. Abigail?
Hey, thank you. So I think it would be useful to have some clarity if we're going to include commercial, what we mean by commercial, and the not necessarily having legislative intent or some of that structure built in. At this stage, it's concerning because there is commercial collection that happens without really touching Maryland or county or city systems at all. It is delivered to a Target, for example. The packaging is collected by a private contractor and taken, and these are virtually closed loop systems where it is not a part of any Maryland system, and having to pay a fee of some sort, you know, into the EPR program for something that does not touch that and is, you know, not necessarily in a place where the program would theoretically be improved in any substantial way by an EPR program. It just creates some complexity in how exactly any fees collected therein would be applied. And then the other one, and I know that a little bit of this was raised in the chat, but tertiary packaging, to me, often makes me think of pallets, which are not something that gets to your traditional consumer, as we often think of in the context of this discussion. They're not made with the intent to be immediately recyclable. They're reused multiple times, but it's not in a tracking system. I just think that elements like that, or a definition for what tertiary packaging is and how it should be treated, there needs to be some clarity there, because otherwise, I mean, what are you going to send it on? You know, it's a difficult one. And then, you know, I think keeping in mind some of these external programs that are under consideration, or other legislation under consideration, you know, whether it's here or elsewhere, if certain materials that would otherwise fit into the scope of covered materials are going to be also under other requirements, you know, whether it's consumer bag, a single-use bag legislation in the future, if there could be some sort of structure where it's not like 5-cent fee and then also a fee into this system, like one should count for the other, or a structure like that. So
and I think some of those are details that we can actually figure out in the plan. And in tertiary, we may even want to define in regulation also. So there could be other areas where we address these that are not in legislation. But I think they're all good points that you're making, and there are things that we have to think about as we're going through this.
Yeah, Bradley, in the interest of you know, making sure we work in everybody's comment at this time, my question really is the PRO. I mean, we have Peter here. The PRO should be able to define those things, and we shouldn't, you know, we shouldn't really spend too much time defining it for them. I think we captured it, and one of their responsibility. They still have to bring it to the advisory council and MDE for approval. So maybe that's a good way to cover that aspect, because I think, yeah, there are some value in that conversation.
I think the pro will be putting a lot of this in their plan.
Yeah.
The question on residential or commercial, I think the states are actually defining those.
I agree with that. I'm just talking about all the other things that were the nuances of packaging. And Peter, maybe you can comment on that. I think this is the responsibility of the pro to define this when we get to the end of it, so and bring it for approval. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, I mean, there's got to be. I mean, the issue is always going to be the question of legislative authority. So, you know, if there is a conflict, if there's an issue where a producer is saying, I am not captured, or I am captured, or whatever that issue might be, it is better for it to be clearly laid out either in the legislation or if that's in rules afterwards. But the more it's clear within the intent of what the government is seeking, the better for. I mean, we're a compliance organization. We're trying to make sure that people can meet their compliance needs. And so I bring those issues up just more so that as long as there's a clear decision as to what the intent is from the outset, that would be helpful to allow the pro to implement.
Yeah, agreed. All right. I am, Martha, did you have a comment?
Yeah, right. So I put it in the chat. Why the service packaging is covering a whole bunch of stuff that local governments have been acting on, and even the state. And I'm just trying to understand if this is an attempt to put decisions on service packaging and beverage containers all under this program and preempt any other kind of legislation out there, like an independent, for example, a separate post-consumer recycled content for plastic bill. Are you saying that if it's passed, then we would not be able to do that? I don't think it should. And the beverage containers, the issue here is some beverage containers absolutely need to be in this bill. The ones that are being made, I have a whole stack of them in my house, containers that are not recyclable right now at a MRF. They have multi-materials. You know, we need to make sure that those companies redesign their containers to be more recyclable. So, but not the stuff that's easy to recycle and that we can claim through a deposit program. So there has to be more nuance here. I'm just seeing this as a possible opportunity by the producers to include everything and maintain control and not be able to do any other kind of regulation. Sorry.
Yeah, just I know if a state wants to do, like, let's say a plastic bag ban, or let's say a county wants to do that, I think they could still do that. So, and oftentimes in these language, there's references to other parts of the law. So you mentioned the PCR law. Let's say that passes. I mean, these are going to have to coordinate with each other so that they're not conflicting. So, and I believe that discussion actually did come up in the testimony last year, that there was a separate PCR law. What if that passes? How is that going to impact a potential EPR law? Or I know there's discussion, should PCR be looped into the EPR discussion as well? So, Peter?
I think sorry, but to the extent there are no targets in the statute,
right,
that's going to be our interest, is making sure that there are targets by implementing bills outside of this, if that's the only way to do it. So just keep that in mind. I would like to see, a revision of this section.
I was just going to say, Martha, I know this conversation comes up a number of times in lots of jurisdictions. I know it's come up lots of times in Canada. We've had a move to sort of ban certain single-use products. The idea really in the legislation is not to interfere with that, but to make sure that the types of materials that are going to potentially make their way back into the recycling system are captured, so that the costs can be adequately provided across. So even if you have a ban potentially on single-use plastic bags, you may still have paper bags and things like that that are making their way in. So you're capturing that within the broad, and it's not interfering with other legislation.
Yeah. All good discussion. I'm going to move on to the next item, if that's all right. So the scope of covered entities, and this may be a point of clarification with Ellen. You said covered entities. Did you mean like what the definition of producer was? And then if that was your intent, currently in the enrolled bill of SB222, producer was not cut. It was there is definition of producer, and this is generally paraphrased. There's more of it. And then here are the general exemptions of the producer definition as well.
I have nothing to add there. That's what I meant, Bradley, for sure. I don't know if Peter wants to add here if there's different things. So didn't mean to change. I think, so yeah, I don't have anything to add here. I don't know, Peter, if you have something to add from experience, if they're two separate cuts here, just what I'd like to hear. If not, no.
I mean, this piece here is really, really important, how this actually gets written. And I we are dealing with challenges in various jurisdictions as to lack of clarity in some ways between how the hierarchy of the producer is defined. And there being some conflicts between different states. And so it makes it difficult for producers to actually know who they are. So more than happy to sort of get into more detail on this one. I don't want to eat up a lot of time, but there are lots of weird and wacky types of relationships when you may have two brands on an item, that you might have, various types of contractual relationships happening between producers. But
yeah, sorry, there was actually a fifth one to here. And it was if there was a relationship, or it was something like if there's a contract between two brands and a brand had taken the responsibility of the obligations. Like there's a fifth one to here.
But typically the way that it operates is it's the person that's closest to the decision making. So the person that's closest to make the decision on how to package And so that could be the brand owner, that could be the licensee. I guess potentially when we're talking about service packaging, it could be the manufacturer. So you may want different definitions for producer, or the hierarchy for service packaging and for producer. And as I said, happy to get into more detail on that or present on that. We're having internal discussions on this issue internally at CAA. And obviously, exemptions complicate our lives horribly and create issues. So, the general advice I would say is choose them sparingly.
And we got a whole list of items right here. So, all right. So there was a comment to maybe take a look at the definition of producer in Minnesota. That's maybe something that we'll have to look at our next meeting. But again, this is currently what we have in law. So this is what we would have to recommend to adjust if we wanted to make those recommendations. All right.
Bradley, can we get to data collection and reporting, at least in the time we have?
Yep. So data collection and reporting. So just wanted to, and we do have to leave some time for public comment. So just quickly, what are some of the items that we need to include in data collection and reporting?
So, I mean, typically, Bradley, this will include, really the key aspects around which the pro is responsible for. So, collection and access, how much materials are being collected, access, that type of thing, management, how those materials are actually being managed at the end of life. Obviously, how much material is being supplied, the covered material is being supplied into the marketplace. Financial, producers that are registered with the program. There may be other auditing types of requirements that are part of audit and verification that's required as part of the program.
So do producers, when they submit their data, need to provide a certification of that through some sort of audit?
I guess I was more speaking to audit and verification potentially of what the pro is providing back. Usually there's audit and verification requirements as part of reporting as well. So that might be financial auditing, that could be performance.
All right, Martha, I think you had a comment as well.
Right. I mean, aside from the kind of annual, and systematic data collection, a good practice is to have an independent evaluation of the program, say every several years, commissioned to assess the effectiveness and efficiency in meeting the program's objectives, which is why we get back to the objectives of the program. It has to be at the beginning, but that would be something that I would definitely want to see, given that this is pretty much uncharted territory, that all these states are trying to regulate all different kinds of packaging and products. So that would be extremely important in my view.
Is that, Martha, is that the 5 year? I mean, typically
something like 5 years. Yeah.
But the program plan usually needs to get re-approved in that 5 year period. So that I'm just wondering whether that speaks to that piece.
It could be coordinated with that. Yes, it makes sense if you're about to consider, relaunching something for another 5 years, to have an independent evaluation, from an outside third party, to make recommendations on what's working, what's not working, based on the evidence at hand in terms of meeting the objectives.
Hey, Bradley, just a time check. We need to make sure we get the public to comment as well before we close.
Yeah. So I thought this was a very excellent discussion. Just one thing that I want to point out, it does seem that there is a lot more consensus out there than what I think some folks might have initially thought, which I think is really heartening, and then makes me a little bit more confident that we're going to see a program in the future. It's the details, of course, have to be worked out. I'm going to move on to the public comment. Is there anybody in the public that wants to make a comment right now for the record? Andrew?
Yeah, I know. In 2 minutes, it's tough to sort of get to all the topics that were discussed today. But from the perspective of Ameripen, we would encourage some of these issues with some of the very same players have been talked through a lot with regard to at least the structural elements in Minnesota. Minnesota is obviously the law that's passed most recently, probably had the greatest amount of consensus among some of the stakeholders. So I just continue to encourage the group to look at some of that foundation, like the definition of producer is 1.5 pages in Minnesota. We did a lot of work on that, trying to address some of the different situations. So anyway, I'll just throw that out there in the 90 seconds we've got here.
Eric?
Hi. Speaking as a member of the public here, quick update on the needs assessment with 30 seconds left. We are moving very quickly to finalize this document. A lot of technical memorandum are being submitted to MDE. We are writing the needs assessment actively, and we're shooting to get the draft and final completed by the end of January. And so at this point, we're on track to do that. One point about data collection, we have evaluated a lot of the data that MDE currently collects, right? So if we're talking about third-party audits, you want to make sure that there's some consideration for the robust reporting that already exists and how that would be coordinated. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And so just an update on the needs assessment. We have reviewed 3 of those memos, provided comments. We're expecting another batch of those from our contractor HGR this Friday. So we will be reviewing those. So there's a lot going on, a lot of late nights. So are there any other public comments?
Wow, what a great meeting. To your point, Bradley. Thanks everyone. Really very collegial and with candid inputs. So thank you very much for this collaboration.
We will be posting this on our website, and everyone should have the link to our website. We've distributed that before. If you need it again, just let me know. So this PowerPoint presentation with these blank slides right here. So these are other things that we're going to have to take a look at as well. So we can finish that conversation and then we can get to voting. And I see Sarah has put that in the chat. So 1 minute over. It's pretty good. If there are no other questions, comments, concerns, I think we're ready to adjourn this meeting.
Have a wonderful day, folks.
All right. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.